This week on Information Technology Leaders, Craig Eisler, President and CEO of Action Engine Corporation. Now here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest is the President and CEO of the Action Engine Corporation. His interest in technology and mathematics started early. He earned first place in his high school's computer science contest and ranked 17th of 4,500 in the University of Waterloo's National Mathematics Contest. The fact that 16 people officially scored higher than he did frustrates him to this day. His mantra is, "I don't play to lose," and that credo has served him well through a fascinating career. His early work in Canada's banking industry taught him the power of technology, and work at Watcom served as a testing ground for his engineering prowess and disregard for management. These both carried forward through 7 years at Microsoft, where he was integral in the development of DirectX and the Chrome technologies, among other projects. This led to his founding Action Engine. In an 18-year career, he shipped 16 pieces of software and has been issued 11 patents, and he's not done yet. Please welcome Craig Eisler.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Where did you grow up?
Oh, where did I grow up? Well, technically speaking, have I? Thunder Bay, Ontario is where I spent from 7 till 19 before I went to university. So I guess, yeah, I grew up there.
Why did your family move around so much, and do you think that affected your personality?
Yeah, my dad was a produce manager for a large national wholesaler, and I was born in Regina, Saskatchewan, which is middle of nowhere next to middle of nowhere, Montana, and then moved to middle of nowhere, Manitoba, onto middle of nowhere, Manitoba again, and then to Thunder Bay, and then just as when it looked like we were on our way to Toronto, which is in the middle of somewhere, Canada, he stopped, and I got stuck there from 7 till 18. And so certainly growing up in Thunder Bay was an interesting experience, to say the least. It's a very interesting town. Duluth, Minnesota, your closest neighbor, and Winnipeg, Manitoba, your closest Canadian neighbor. So you're a very isolated town, a very interesting place to grow up.
How do you think all that moving around affected you?
The moving itself, didn't so much impact me. I think that it impacted my ability to form friendships, I think, because we were moved so much at a very young age. But other than that, certainly prepared me to move around a lot, which I'd say my career and just my general living style. I have not lived in the same place for a whole long time. That's probably a reflection of my childhood.
When did you first know you were smart?
When did I first know? Well, I would say the jury's out on that, but I would say that it started to become evident that I was a little different than other people, probably by the 2nd or 3rd grade when kids started to beat me up on the playground. And that's usually a good sign. Plus my haircut was different and my clothes were different. And so, I'd say probably the 2nd or 3rd grade I got a good clue, but the evidence started to pour in later on, but 2nd grade, the beatings really kind of drove the point home.
That you were smart?
Yeah.
Yeah. And when did you sort of start measuring everything in terms of kind of a mental scorecard?
Oh, man. Yeah. I can't recall when I haven't. So there's I said I wouldn't do a Star Trek quote, but I'll do one Star Trek quote, which is when Commander Riker says to Worf, it's only a game, Worf, relax. And Worf says, but Commander, if winning is not important, why keep score? And I think that pretty much has been the entire way I've viewed my life. Everything's about score, whether it's money, whether it's patents, whether it's about a grade, whether it's about number of people using technology. I've from the very beginning always tried to get the best score, whatever the metric was. And I can't even say when it started so early.
Yeah. What encouraged you to begin powerlifting?
What encouraged me to begin powerlifting? Let's see, it was getting beat up a lot.
The beatings,
no, the 12th, it was something in the 12th grade, it was an opportunity to, in a gym class, we were told that we could, however much we improved doing something, we'd be measured, and went, oh, I could go fake I was weak at weights completely and then improve over a 6-week period and get better. And then as it turned out, over that 6-week period, or 8-week period, I started to fall in love with it. And then I found there's this really interesting individual contributor sport called powerlifting, where you didn't have to be coordinated, you didn't have to talk to other people, you didn't have to have anything to do with anyone, you could just move really heavy objects all by yourself. And so I started to do that pretty seriously from 19 to about 25 when I got a pretty serious injury and had to stop, but I competitively powerlifted for 4 years. And I liked that a lot because it was a chance to get away from the world for a couple hours and to really kind of test myself against absolute measures, which is, of course, the way I like to do things.
Did you really start out by pretending you couldn't lift stuff so you could show improvement?
Yes. I did, too. I had great improvement.
I'm sure you did.
I got a good score.
What other areas interested you at that point in terms of your learning?
In high school?
Yeah.
So I had a great deal of fascination always with sciences and with mathematics, and then though what really that was kind of all through grade school, and then by the 11th grade, the first Commodore PETs showed up in my school. They were the ones with the little chiclety keyboard. They didn't have a full size one yet, and they had this little glow in the dark neon radiation screen, and they allowed you to take them home on the weekends, and I remember I took one home one weekend and didn't sleep for 2 nights straight, stayed at program, and there were no games back then, so all you could do with it was program it to do something, and so I stayed up for 2 nights straight programming in what was assembly language for those machines, the machine code for those things, and that really, I think, was the trigger point for my love of computer science.
And you taught yourself how to do that?
Yeah, there were no books, there
Yeah.
was just, you know, little manuals, and that was about it.
How did you decide which college to attend?
Well, there was really only one choice for me. So I had, as I said, a fascination for mathematics and for sciences and for computer science. And I also grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money, so going to college was a bit of a challenge. And so there was really one choice for both those, to solve both those problems, was the University of Waterloo in Canada, because they had the most outstanding mathematics computer science program. Top-notch in North America, actually. It's a place where Microsoft recruits a lot out of. But in addition, they had a co-op system where you could go to school for 4 months, go to work for 4 months, school for 4 months, work for 4 months, so you could bootstrap your way through college.
Right.
And so for me, there was just one logical choice, and it just happened to be that both my interests, the need to make some money to pay for it, and the things that I love to do were offered by that school.
Did you find the academics hard, or did you find them easy?
I drove people crazy. So here's how I studied for every exam all the way till when I left grad school. The night before, did all the sample tests for the questions, rather, that we had in our assignments, and read my notes 3 times. And then I would prepare and go. And so I would say that I didn't find it overly hard, and it infuriated my roommates and friends alike.
Because your grades were, I'm sure,
because my grades
better.
were very, very high, and I didn't apparently have to work at it. And
So you talked about the co-op program. What was your first interview process when you were getting your first job within the co-op program there?
Oh, so University of Waterloo's co-op program well, it was then. I can't say it's still if it's still unique, but in the 80s it was very unique in that they brought in employers and you were formally interviewed. So it wasn't, and you went on a job and you were paid a market rate, and you had a job review every 4 months, and you might not be allowed to come back, and so they did a very formal process, and so you would apply for a dozen jobs. And then stack rank them, and then the employers would stack rank you, and then they'd get who they wanted, and so it was very good for the employers and also good for the students. And so I did that very process. I had to buy some non-jeans and some non-t-shirt, because that was pretty much my wardrobe, to go through an interview, and in fact, I think I bought a whole suit and went through an interview process. That was the only time I ever wore a suit, actually, I think, was during that one interview in my first year. And then ended up at the Bank of Montreal, where I spent 16 months.
What types of projects were you working on there?
I love that. I think that's where I truly fell in love with hacking, because I was assigned the job of being an MVS systems programmer. And so what did that mean? Well, MVS was the operating system that ran on the large mainframes that the bank used for their banking system. And they had a tiny group of 6 people whose job it was to hack the operating system so that the people who did the online banking system had the features they needed. And so for 16 months, my job was to read through microfiche of the IBM operating system and figure out how to apply little patches to make it do something different. So that was pretty neat. And I would say that my favorite moment of all time there was we built a piece of software that doesn't matter what the technical details were, but a piece of software I did took down the banking system in all of Canada 4 times in one day. So that was pretty cool.
Literally the banking system.
Literally,
not
when you go in and the
test
teller
system.
says, "We're sorry, the computers are down,"
That was you.
me.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
And instead of being mortified by that, you found that pretty incredible.
Well, it was incredible because it went to show you the power software could have, and the power that one could have with the software. Not that it was on purpose, and not that it was malicious, and it just turns out it was a failure of procedures, not actual errors in the software. Procedures that I failed to document accurately, apparently, or they failed to read accurately. I guess I'll go with they failed to read accurately, but nonetheless, it taught me how powerful software could be.
What else did having this type of co-op situation teach you about work in the real world?
Well, it certainly it taught me that some jobs can completely suck, and so I had a choice with the co-op system. You have to spend 2 terms or 8 months with one employer, but then you're allowed to change. And I'd spent 4 terms or 16 months with the Bank of Montreal, and I loved it there. In fact, I figured I would go there as a career, but I said to myself, well, there's too much of an opportunity here to turn it down. There's 2 more work terms left. I have 2 more work terms left. I should go find another job. So I went through a set of interviews again. I opted to leave Bank of Montreal, did more interviews, ended up with 2 jobs that I wanted. One was with IBM as a PC software programmer, and one was with the Royal Bank of Canada doing what they told me would be an online real-time banking system, which was kind of the counterpart to the thing that I was doing at the Bank of Montreal. Now, in a twist of irony, given what I did later, IBM told me I wasn't qualified to do PC programming, so I ended up at the Royal Bank, and it turned out that what they meant by real-time banking system is offline COBOL report programs. And so for 4 months, I did pretty much the most miserable work known to man, and in 2 hours a day, did what they wanted, and then spent 6 hours working on something called a compiler. So that was kind of fun. I got paid to do that, but I left after 4 months. I couldn't do that. It was pretty miserable.
So you were pretty unhappy with them, but were they happy with you?
Oh yeah, they were delighted because of course they couldn't get anyone with even a smidgen of talent to want to do COBOL report programming in a bank in Canada, and so I looked like a superhero in the 2 hours a day I focused on their problems, but it just wasn't a lot of fun. And it turns out that was, when you look at kind of how the tapestry of your career unfolds, that was a pivotal turning point, because I went back to the Bank of Montreal after 2 weeks of this actually and said, hey, do you have room? And they said, no, we lost the headcount when you left, and now we can't have it back because we're a bank. And, we're a bureaucracy, and that's just how it works. So my professor, my mathematical physics professor that I had taken this fluids mechanics course with, said, hey, you could come be a research assistant with me on your next work term. So I did, and I said, okay, that's great, I'll go do that next summer. And then that ended up pulling me into a graduate school career where I thought, hey, you know, I like this mathematical physics thing, I'll go do that. And so as a result of leaving the Bank of Montreal, for no good reason except for to try something else, I ended up in graduate school doing mathematical physics research.
And then you actually started doing the coursework for graduate school. Did you end up graduating?
No, I did all the coursework, got halfway through my thesis, and was staring at this VT, no one here will know what this is, but at this VT100 terminal, which is this all gold screen, watching these little stars go up, because of course my worst course as an undergrad and graduate was computational physics, right? Good at computer science, good at physics, hated the merger of the two, hated doing it. Turns out that's what I was going to be doing apparently for the rest of my life. And so I remember I had this pivotal moment where I was staring at the screen, going, I cannot look at another failed, stupid set of stars trying to look like a wave anymore. Picked up a phone, called a friend of mine at a company called Whatcom. He said that if I ever was interested in a job, I said, hey, you said if I was ever interested, I'm interested. Did you mean it? And I got a part-time job there, and then about 4 months later, I quit and went there full-time sometime in 1990.
And what were you hired to do?
What was I hired to do? Or what did I do?
What were you hired to do?
I was hired to go take a DOS-based forms library and try to make it Windows-based. So that's techno speak for basically something that gives you something you might build Excel out of on DOS. Hey, it would just work on Windows. And it's a well-known, impossible problem to actually, well, was well-known to me anyway, that you couldn't take something and make it look good on DOS and on Windows and all these other things. And I thought it was the dumbest idea ever, and so I did other things instead, much to the chagrin of my supervisor.
So once again, you find yourself spending 25% of the time working on what you were hired to do, and 75% of the time
on something that was more interesting.
On something that was more.
Yeah, and it turns out that more interesting thing was, well, see, they assigned me to do this Windows thing, but they had no debugger for Windows, which is a tool a developer uses to find their bugs in their code. And so I said, well, I should build a debugger. And then as I was in the process of building a debugger, I saw these things that you could do with Windows to enable really powerful applications called 32-bit applications, which you couldn't do on Windows 3. And so I just started a project to do that, and then went and convinced the president of the company that was a much more interesting thing for me to be doing than this other thing that this guy wanted me to do. And that's when the Windows Extender project was born at Wacom. And
yeah. One of the things you had told me is that, quote, if I don't agree with a boss, I make his life a living hell. Yeah. That's not very diplomatic of you, is it?
Not particularly, no.
No. How'd that work out for you?
That worked out, well, it worked out great for me. Didn't always work out so well for my bosses. It's ongoingly, as I look over my career, I've had a very strong opinion on what I should do, and was perhaps, in hindsight, not as graceful or polite about getting done what I needed to get done, and was, made my bosses' lives unnecessarily painful, and that actually came to a head later when I was working on DirectX. In fact.
Can you talk about the difference between coding for speed and coding for elegance?
coding for elegance is something you do in a university, and coding for speed is something you do in the real world. Seriously, though, no, coding for speed is basically when you have a problem, you're trying to address a market window, and it's typically something like with DirectX, you're trying to get software out so that games could ship for Christmas, and no matter how hard we try, we can't get anyone to move Christmas, and so as a result, schedules are schedules. And it turns out I'm going through that right now in my current company as well, where phones launch for Christmas and no one will move Christmas, no matter how much I lobby all the pagans. So it's just Christmas happens at December 25th. And so as a result, you end up coding to mate deadlines as opposed to coding for what might be the most beautiful, elegant, or pleasing solution.
Kind of back to Whatcom, did you like the customer service side of the job?
Not particularly.
No? Were you any good at it?
Was I any? Well, my role wasn't to be customer facing, albeit I was, because we work with companies like Autodesk and Lotus and even IBM all use this technology that I was working on, and so I worked with the technical customers, and that went pretty well. But no, I was. I think my friend Alex put it best. I was a surly little troll as far as interacting with customers back then.
Why did you make fun of people who accepted positions at Microsoft?
Well, because they weren't. Well, no, they wasn't making fun of him so much in 1989. It was when I graduated in '89. A number of my friends went to Microsoft then, and I made fun of them because they, in fact, were being unwise, and instead of embracing the graduate school path, the path to greater learning, they were going off to that stupid DOS company, and no one will use DOS anyways.
Yeah, they'll show you.
Yeah, that worked out for them. So I remember that very well, and so I wisely stayed behind, but did then come on 4 years later.
How did you meet Eric Engstrom, and what was your first impression of him?
How did I meet Eric? I met Eric. Eric was the evangelist. So Microsoft has a role called technical evangelist, and their job is to, at least in the early 90s, was to go out and get the developer community, the people who built software, to move on to Microsoft technologies. It's not as difficult a task today as it was in the 90s, and people view Microsoft as a monopoly today, but back then, Windows was an emerging thing, and so the job was to go out and find developers that would embrace and do things the way Microsoft wanted to. And well, Eric's job was to go find tools companies, and I was a tools company. I was the only person who would do what he wanted. So he and I bonded very quickly because, well, we were very similar personalities. My first impression was, I don't remember, big, loud, funny. He's still big and loud. It's not so funny, though.
Not as funny anymore. How did Eric respond when you told him that you wanted his job?
Oh, that's right. I remember that. He responded by getting me an interview at Microsoft.
He said, "You can have it."
I should have read something into that, I suppose, in hindsight. It's like, here, I love my job. You have it. Yeah. We were. It was in. Funny how that happened. It was in early '93. It was at a software developers conference that we went to every year, and he and I were driving on the. Actually, we were driving on the. He had decided that the curb must be a commuter lane, and so he was just driving really fast on the 101 right beside the barricade, going, "Look, there's no cars." And I made a comment about how I wanted his job, and he said, "Oh, you can have it." And I said, "No, Eric, you misunderstood. I don't want a technical evangelist job. I want your job." Ha ha, the old competitive thing. And next thing I knew, I was interviewing at Microsoft. The next thing I knew, I moved to Seattle.
You had a job.
Yeah.
So even though you were somewhat handpicked for this position, you still had to go through the full interview cycle.
Process.
What was that like?
I learned a very valuable lesson there, which is the more you let someone else talk about themselves, the more impressive you are in an interview. And so it was very rigorous. Microsoft's a very rigorous process. They put you through a full day. They always do. But I noticed that with most of the evangelists who were natural talkers, if you let them talk about themselves, why, you got great marks for what a great candidate you were. Yeah. And so there's only one guy who wouldn't fall victim to that. He kept making me answer questions. It was a long day. I wasn't handpicked. I was just simply recommended. I think Eric got a mug out of my getting hired or something really inspiring like that. But no, it was exciting. It was rigorous. It was interesting to learn, though, that you could manipulate the interview process by letting people talk about themselves. I think that was the first time I ever figured that out.
So tell us about the role of a technical evangelist in terms of the area you were specifically involved in.
My job was to find tools. So I had worked at a tools company for 4 years almost, and tools are the things that, we were a set of developers that built tools for other developers, so other developers could build more software, kind of a virtuous cycle for Wacom. And my job, since I knew the space, was to go take the other tools companies, at the time companies like Symantec and Borland, who changed their name to something else and is now back at being Borland.
These were your
Symantec
competitors.
who are also were Wacom's competitors, but Wacom was also a customer as well, though viewed Microsoft as a competitor. So my job was to get them to adopt this really crazy thing called Chicago, which was then Windows 95, and Windows NT, which is now Windows XP, and bring their tools over there. And it was really, really hard because I was viewed basically as a left hand or right hand of Satan because they were the biggest competitor as well. And so it was a tough job, and I think that was the reason I lasted, I think, 11 months, almost a year. You were obligated to be there a full year, and I kind of worked my way out a month early, simply because it was not a thing that being an evangelist for tools developers is not something I wanted to do. I did, however, have a love for video games, playing them mostly, not building them. And there was a games evangelist position that had come open, and so I applied for that position, but a very good friend of mine, Alex St. John, also applied, and he was the bigger man, so to speak, and you've interviewed him, so you'll know he's the bigger man, and won the role, to which I said, fine, I'll go build it then, to heck with you, and left the group, and got a job in the multimedia group on Windows 95, with a job that wasn't actually to build DirectX, but of course, being me, I changed it into that.
Right, into what that became. So again, how did you meet Alex and Alex St. John, and what was your first impression of him?
I think they're all the same, big, loud, and funny. Eric and Alex are my two best friends, and I think I have the same first impression of them. I met Alex as an evangelist. I think somebody hauled me over to his office because they had heard I lifted weights and Alex lifted weights, and they said, well, you two should meet. And so he and I kind of sized each other up and said, yeah, I could go lift weights with you. And that's kind of where that started. That was back in 93.
How did that work out at first?
It worked out. We were, I would say we're extraordinarily competitive people, and so we were extraordinarily competitive about weightlifting and about, the other person's doing it wrong and they're cheating and they're this and they're that. I think we fought a lot, but we kept going back, so that worked out okay.
Now, you were okay being competitive with him because he's like twice your size.
Yeah, but, that's okay. No, it turns out that he and I were very similarly strengthed.
Really?
Yeah, we were very similar in strength, so that, I think, is what led to it being so much fun and competitive.
So now he's the games evangelist, and you're working on starting to build some of this stuff.
Yeah, I got recruited in to go fix a couple of problems. There was a thing called WinG that was coming out that was a repurposing of some Win95 technology onto Windows 3, and then this thing from Intel called DCI, and I was kind of asked to come in as I had a title called Project Lead, which was a title they made up, I think, to make me happy. Because they didn't want to make me a technical lead, but I didn't want to be just an ordinary developer, so they gave me some title in between. And so I looked at both of those and said, well, that's interesting, but not the way I would choose to have games come onto Windows. And so instead I went and did a bunch of research and white papers and collaborated with Alex a lot, and then recruited my friend Eric, who'd gone into hibernation in ITG, to come in as a program manager, and I brought him in, I think in September or October of '94, and then we kind of just did this little skunk works project where Eric kind of protected me while I started to work on this, what we later called DirectX. We didn't call it DirectX at first, while he kind of managed outside perceptions.
Tell us about your first meeting with Bill Gates.
My first meeting with Bill. I think my first meeting with Bill was over the Apple, was it Apple lawsuit? Yeah. Oh, that was very interesting because he was mad because Apple was suing Microsoft over having stolen QuickTime, which was over some low-level driver technology that some third-party consultant had done. And I used it as an opportunity to lean over to Brad Silverberg, who ran the Windows 95 team, and say, now would be a great time to get rid of that DCI name, wouldn't it? Because we wanted to do this other thing. So I remember that he was mad, and I immediately saw an opportunity to get my way and get rid of the baggage of this DCI thing.
Was it intimidating being in a room with Bill, or were you pretty comfortable with it?
I was pretty, I mean, I think early in my career, people with big titles did intimidate me. Certainly being around Brad and Bill was a little intimidating. Not intimidating enough. Didn't stop me, but it is always a little intimidating to be around someone with a big title. Somehow people's titles seem to make them bigger for some reason, even though in the end they're just people that, kind of go to the bathroom and wash their hands and do all the same stuff people do, well, presumably. And but somehow the title makes them seem bigger. And along the way, I interacted with enough people with enough big titles that were still ordinary people that I built up a tolerance for that.
Why is it insane to embrace somebody else's standards?
Well, because then you don't make any bloody money, right? It's like if you embrace someone else's standards, and this was a topic that came up around doing 3D at Microsoft. There was two kinds of, there was an existing technology called OpenGL from Silicon Graphics at the time, And then there was what we wanted to do in DirectX, which is something we call Direct 3D, and we were told that was dumb and it was this and it was that because there's existing technology. And the problem is you don't make any bloody money embracing someone else's standards. They control your future. They control your destiny. Standards are a great way to become bananas, right? To get completely commoditized down, so you're arguing if you're 35 cents or 33 cents a pound, right? And so that was, I think, the lesson that was lost on people back then, is that if you embrace someone else's standards, you lose. It doesn't matter if in the end, right now I believe Direct 3D is now the OpenGL API. It doesn't matter. It's called Direct 3D belongs to Microsoft. That's key to winning.
You were soon promoted to development manager. What characteristics do you think you demonstrated that made you promotion worthy?
Interesting question. Well, I think the people who manage me ask themselves that question in hindsight repeatedly. Certainly, you know, I can hold a lot of things in my head at once. So I was able to keep track of large projects in my head. I could task people well. I could kind of keep track of all the aspects of projects well. I was not necessarily a very good people manager, and what I mean by that is individuals that are early in their careers require a particular kind of mentorship, which I have very little patience to give. I don't have a lot of patience for people that are trying to learn. And that's just a flaw in myself, and I know that about myself now. I don't try to manage people like that. I manage people who don't need my help.
Or you find someone else.
Or find someone else to manage them, exactly, and that's what I did. But I think that certainly the early successes with DirectX, my early successes in building up the development team around me, was what in Microsoft, promotions followed success. They didn't. They weren't a precursor to success. So once you demonstrated enough success, like you were operating at that level already, they gave you a promotion. Of course, that was quickly followed by getting the worst review of my life. So Microsoft had this review system, which was a 3, a 3.5, and a 4. That was basically the 3 reviews ratings you could get. And they were about equally distributed, a third, a third, a third, although grade inflation set in, and then it became 25%, 40%, 35% towards the higher grades. And I got 4s. I got 4.5, 4.5. You know, that's just what I got.
Which was pretty unheard of.
Unheard of, yeah. It was the top 1%. And then I got a 3.5, which is saying I was average. And you actually should give me a 2.5. Don't call me average. Just don't call me average, right? Give me a 2.5. Tell me I suck so bad I got to go. And I remember that very well because this was a great learning moment for me, actually, because I got my review from my poor manager at the time. Like, I was a terrible employee. I don't remember exactly when I threw it and where I threw it exactly. I just remember crumpling it and over my shoulder and making an obscenity on the way out the door. And I saw Eric and let him know I was quitting on my way out. And Eric talked me out of it and talked me into going to talk to Brad Silverberg, who was he was a vice president then, who ran the Windows 95 team, and Brad sat me down and spent an hour with me, and it was like a really breakthrough moment for me, because he said, look, Craig, I gave you a 4.5 for technology and a 2.5 for getting along with people and making my life a living hell. And I said, oh, well, now I'm forced to include this person who I have a lot of respect for.
Because you were proud of that before.
Oh yeah, that's what I got things done, right? Break a little glass, things get done. Well, it turns out that you can break so much glass that you can make your senior manager's life so miserable that you aren't necessarily worth the hassle. And that was the message Brad said, is right now you're still worth the hassle, Craig. Here's a 3.5, but it isn't going to stay there. You need to choose whether you're going to interact with people in a more productive way and create less work for me, or if you're going to continue to create work for me, and then you can go create work for somebody else. So it was a great moment, because up until then I was able to dismiss most people's feedback as irrelevant. Like, those people aren't worthy of giving me feedback. But Brad, I had deemed worthy of giving me feedback, and here he was telling me I had to buck up.
When you were sitting in that conversation, were you listening to him and hearing it, or did you need to walk out the door and take a deep breath before you were able to say, maybe there was something there?
God, that's hard to say. Certainly it seems like in the moment it occurred to me, but probably I was still hopping mad, and I had to go think about it. Sitting back now, years later, it seems like, oh yes, I was very wise and very, very mature about it, and took it all and was insightful, but I probably went home, got mad, and still thought about quitting, and then realized that Brad might have had something to say.
Reasonable to say.
Yeah.
Well, you described yourself as an IQist. What is an IQist?
An IQist? Well, so there's racists, and there's people who have issues with gender, and there's people, and I just don't like stupid people. So I say, if there's one thing I don't like, I don't have a lot of tolerance for. Actually, I shouldn't say I don't like them. I'm sure stupid people are very likable. I just have a lot of tolerance. I like to surround myself by smart people. I don't like to have to interact with dumb people, and that sounds rude, I suppose, but if there was to be an ist, I don't care. Race, color, creed, sexual orientation, none of it. It's all good, right? Just don't be dumb.
What is an inverted bread sandwich?
That's when you get a review. We can't say that on television, can we? That's when you get a review that instead of having the bread and then the bad stuff and then the bread, it's when you get the bad stuff, a little bread, and then the bad stuff on the outside of the bread, yeah, the inverted bread sandwich. I've received a couple of those kinds of reviews in my life from frustrated managers who were very delighted with what I was doing from a technology and productivity perspective and not very happy with my getting along with people.
So the surly troll thing was just
The
not
surly little
working
troll
anymore.
was not working. It was not working. At Wacom, as a brief little side note, I got this inverted bread sandwich review, and my response to that was to go make a big bloody wallpaper with happy thoughts written on it and blood running down and put it in everyone's company computer. Think happy thoughts, because I was saying things around the company that the company president didn't like, and he was probably happy to see me go.
But in some other ways, probably not so happy.
Oh, no, absolutely not. I mean, I certainly was the brain trust for all the Windows work Wacom was doing. Again, I hadn't quite reached the point where I realized that there was a limit to how much trouble you should cause, so I was probably getting close to being more trouble than I was worth.
Do you have any favorite stories from the DirectX days?
I guess my favorite, well, there's several, but one of my favorite memories is we'd do a lot of all-nighters, and then Eric and I, it was right before we had to, we were releasing DirectX for the Christmas games. I think it was for Christmas games. It might have been a beta, but it doesn't matter. The point is that we were in Eric's 911. We were driving at approximately 130 miles an hour down 405 at 8 in the morning on a Saturday, trying to make a that day FedEx pickup to go somewhere else, to take the software that we had just finished burning at 7 a.m. onto a CD off to reproduction. That was pretty much, that was DirectX. That was it in a nutshell. Every other moment seemed like that too, but that we physically lived. And I was humming Indiana Jones themed music really loudly as Eric was like swerving cars, knowing that if we got stopped for a ticket, we'd miss the drop.
Right.
But you know, what the heck, right?
You got to try.
You've got to try.
What made you ready to do something new?
Halfway through DirectX 5, it was 1997, I believe, and the internet, that was the internet days. That's when Microsoft really started to get involved in the internet, and that's when people that I had a lot of respect for, Brad Silverberg, John Ludwig, people like that, went off to go do, take on Netscape with Internet Explorer. And so Eric and I talked a lot about kind of, well, we've done a lot of this DirectX stuff, but it's starting to mature, and I'm certain the people that followed took our names in vain repeatedly because they didn't view it as very mature. But to us, we had taken it about as far as we wanted to go. And for me, when you reach a certain point in a technology's life, it's time for people who like to polish as opposed to kind of build, and not even necessarily that they're not innovating, but there's more time for polish later in a product's life. And in the early part, all you're doing is cobbling it as fast as you can with gum and baling wire and all of that. And so there was a really cool opportunity with Internet Explorer to go take the internet browser and jam, and to really, really leverage the Wintel, so-called Wintel, the Windows Intel platform, by jamming as much technology, multimedia technology, into the browsers as we could to make it so there was no way that Netscape could keep up. And so that's where the Chrome project was born. And that's when I ended up having to go work for my best friend, Eric.
Yeah, that was kind of my next question.
That was an interesting, and it was the right decision in hindsight when they made the decision who to make the general manager of the team. It was Ludwig and Silverberg. They certainly coded it, sugar-coated it well by giving Eric and I equal promotions and equal levels and equal stock and all of those good things that Microsoft gave. But in the end, being number two is not the same as being number one. It's not, when you're counting score, that's one less. And it was Eric's one of the few people I could make that work with, and it was the right thing to do. Eric was better equipped then, had a better tool set then to deal with the general manager's role than I did in 97.
In what areas?
He was a little better at communicating with outsiders, a little more better at kind of working, politics and issues. Not that Eric's a political guy, anyone who knows him would claim that's not true, but he was better at kind of more the broad, general kind of outbound part as opposed to the inbound kind of solely focused on technology part. And ironically, I spent a year and a half working for him, doing a lot of the general manager's job, right? There's a lot of things that I was better at than he was, and we worked very well like that. And he's one of the few people where I can just work side by side, and we split up the tasks, and there's no ego, and it just works. But by 98, it was very clear that it was just time for that not to be that way anymore, and there was an opportunity to take over what was called the NetShow team. They were looking for a general manager, and I interviewed for that internally at Microsoft. I later renamed it to Windows Media, but it was called NetShow back then. And I took on that role and kind of broke free of kind of, and that was the first time actually at Microsoft that, Eric and I hadn't been working together.
Yeah. How did Eric feel when you told him that you were going to do something else?
He knew it was the right time for me. He knew that it was the right time. And it's not like we haven't remained friends and we still remain friends. And so that wasn't the issue. It was just that it was time for me to go kind of do my own thing.
You described the previous situation as kind of co-managing, because you said even though there was sort of somewhat of a hierarchy, you were basically just divvying up the tasks. How is it different now that you were leading a team kind of on your own?
Well, oddly enough, it's not a whole lot different. You still divvy up tasks. You know, I have not approached, you know, at Action Engine or when I ran the Windows Media team, both, I didn't approach, my management style was very much to, you know, treat my directs, well, everyone around me, but in particular people who report to me as peers, and assume that they can, you know, that I have something to add, but they have something to add, and so we just divvy up the tasks accordingly. I mean, there's a certain quality of leadership that's hard to measure. It's like, do you inspire people? Do you do this? Do you have a good idea when no one else has? And do you have a happy face when, even though you don't have it, you don't have a happy face inside? And there's all of that. But in the end, it's the way Eric and I work together is the way I like to have my teams work together, which is there's no, it's not the military, right? There's no reporting. There ought not to be stockades and consequences for not following a direct order. And so that's, I've refined that. I feel like I'm better with that at Action Engine than I was with the Windows Media team.
Yeah. I don't see you as somebody able to wear a happy face when you're not happy. Is that something you're any good at?
It's a learned skill.
Is it? Is that what that is? Yes.
Watch.
Yeah. See, here it comes.
How you doing?
Here it comes.
No, absolutely. It's a role thing. It's important. People. One of the things you learn about, and I learned this painfully over the years, is that people view a role differently than a person. And I said that, certainly I knew I viewed others that way, like somehow a senior vice president at Microsoft is somehow magical and there's something about them that makes them different. And so, as it turns out though, a lot of people do view people with titles that way. And so in fact, if you have however you look, whatever your emotions appear to be, is often what people will perceive as being the health of your organization or the health of your company or the health of the business. And so it's important that no matter how you're feeling personally, like you have a headache, right? It doesn't matter if you have a headache and you look pained, it probably means the company's going to go under, right? And so people view roles different. People view people in roles different than they would view the person, you know, over a beer.
You sort of went through this phase. Were you as engaged in doing this part of the business as you were previously? Oh, absolutely.
To me, the fun part of any project, it can go on for years, is the creation of something out of nothing, and that is the best thing. It's the best feeling in the world. It's like, that's why I did DirectX. That's why we went to go do Chrome. That's why I started Action Engine. Why we still Action Engine. We're still creating it out of nothing. It's not done yet. And that to me is the most fun. That's where I bring the most passion to bear. And the Microsoft general manager's role was very different. It took something that was existing, broken in a lot of ways. Pieces were scattered all over the company. There were pieces in research, pieces in other parts of the Windows organization that all needed to be brought together under an umbrella called Windows Media. We needed to reinvent the client from a stupid little gray box to a bigger box called the Windows Media Player. And there's a bunch of things to do, but it wasn't the same as creating from nothing. And I certainly, while I did all the blocking and tackling and learned a lot, I wasn't as passionate in that role as I am when it's something that's my baby from the beginning.
Yeah. What made you finally say, I'm done?
It was the 6 months of negotiations it took with the Windows Me team, the Windows Millennium team, to have Windows Media be a part of Windows Me. And it just went back and forth and back and forth. And a lot of it was Microsoft maturing and finding its way and being a little nervous about doing anything to risk existing businesses. And to me, it's all about taking risks to win, perhaps to the point of foolishness, but regardless, that's my nature. After 6 months, it was like, I remember this very vividly, it was November of '99 when we were finally done and they finally agreed that we'd be in. I got up the next morning and went to my VP and said, I quit. Not till January 31st, but I quit. Can't do this anymore.
My next thing vests.
Don't exactly. I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid. And I'm going to go. I didn't even know what I was going to do. I just knew that I couldn't do that anymore. That I didn't want to wait to see what Microsoft was going to transform into, if it was going to become a big company or stay nimble. I knew that that was too frustrating for me. As it turns out, I think Microsoft has reinvented itself very well, but there was no telling that at the time. And plus, it was the excitement of the bubble, and you figured you could just go make something happen.
Right.
And so I cleverly started a company right as the bubble popped. Perfect timing, really.
Well, onto that. What does Action Engine do?
Action Engine. Action Engine builds something we call an advanced data services platform, or solutions for advanced data services. And what it is it's software to enable operators to launch services and applications on a wide variety of so-called smartphones. And a smartphone is a fascinating little device that looks exactly like a phone, only thanks to Moore's law, both around costs and power. It's got more computing power than the Windows 95 computers we launched on in 1995, and it could be anything from that cool camera 3650 that you can get from T-Mobile, or it could be this new Motorola MPX 200 you can buy from AT&T. It's a PC in disguise.
And what market need drove the development of this?
There was fundamentally there was a number of things that we identified early on, which was voice. So first of all, there was a need to monetize data networks, to monetize data. Carriers were making all these investments in infrastructure for data, but unfortunately they're in a highly competitive business where marginal cost rapidly becomes marginal price. And so you're making all these huge investments, but it's hard to recover the cost. European and Asian markets are completely saturated, and so as a result, the only way they're increasing revenue is by changing customers. So there's a lot of churn, so-called churn, where it can be up to 2 or 3% of your customers in a month, and that may not sound like much, but multiply that up by 12 months, it's enormous. And so when you look at the desire of and voice revenue is pretty much commodity. You buy 5,000 minutes for a nickel or something. Now it's not quite that bad, but it's very, very cheap. So there's a challenge for operators that are publicly traded, which is how do I make money, make more money? So how do I reduce churn, and how do I get more money per user? And that's where we saw the opportunity with a computing device, aka a smart device. There's a reason the internet didn't take off on VT100 dumb terminals, right? You couldn't put much software on there. Well, the experience of browsing a phone on a dumb, without much software there to back up what you're doing is equally poor, like a VT100. Whereas these smartphones were much more of a PC class of device. There was an opportunity to actually create a compelling experience on that phone, so operators could use that to keep churn down, keep customers sticky, and to drive up the amount of money they were making.
And what makes this a unique solution in the marketplace?
What makes it unique is the fact that we identified so early, crazily early, one might argue, that Moore's law would we would be around during the inflection point, and computing power would move down in a low-cost way into these handsets, and so. We started really early in 2000 building software under the assumption that would happen. And it takes a lot of complex research and development to build this. And so we've built a very sophisticated solution that really addresses the needs of an operator that wants to launch, a wireless operator that wants to launch data services in a way that is extremely compelling on these so-called smartphones.
Why do you think the current technologies have failed?
Well, fundamentally, the browser, so basically current technologies are things like WAP, or
WAP as in?
WAP is in wireless. I don't know, but it's WAP is WAP. I don't even know what it stands for. That's a great question. But WAP is a kind of browser from OpenWave that as a protocol, and there's a browser for it. And it's basically someone had a great idea in the bubble that if the internet's great in the home, it must be great in the phone. And so therefore, we'll move a little version of the browser into the phone. Well, the problem with that is that what I think people failed to recognize at first was that fundamentally the experience of a browser and a desktop is just different. Screen's a little bigger, you've got a keyboard, a little more persistent, lower latency connection to the internet. You've got a mouse. All these things are missing from my tiny little cell phone. This does not bear any resemblance to my home computer. And so where they failed was simply because you couldn't deliver a compelling experience using a browser technology on a phone. And so people are looking to better solutions, but that required more computing power, hence the need for smartphones. And so there's kind of a chicken and egg problem in the early days of wireless data, where you didn't have enough computing power in the handset to address the problems.
So in terms of starting your own company, what ended up being easy that you thought would be hard, and what was hard that you thought would be easy?
I can answer the second one really easily. What was easy that I thought would be hard? Well, raising the first round of money was a lot easier than I thought it would be. Raising every subsequent round was a lot harder than I thought it would be. Certainly, there were a lot of things you learn along the way. An organization built at the peak of the so-called bubble. It was hard to recruit people. It was hard to draw top talent, because top talent was going everywhere, so it was a lot of work. It was really, really tough to build the organization, from everything from trying to get a place to trying to get office space was hard in 2000, and so there was a lot of things that were, building an organization that can scale, and the number of things that can change as you go through. our company, for example, is going through a very interesting inflection point as we're moving from 1 or 2 customers to multiple, and that changes everything. How engineering has to interact with customers, how you have to interact with your customers. You have to build a whole organization around that. How do you build a company that can be very adapt and very dynamic, and go through the lifespan of kind of garage shop to kind of, ooh, we've got a customer, to, oh my God, customers are, they might make us, boil over, right? And that's certainly all of that was a learning experience along the way.
How does running a large organization within a larger organization differ from running your own?
Remarkably similar. I was going to say remarkably not different, remarkably similar.
Not to be confused with.
Because in the end, I have a board of directors, like a management team, so I may have a VP and a senior VP I work for. I have to go defend a budget. So I have to go defend a budget to the board. You have to go raise your budget. Well, it's a lot more work. That's where they differ. It's a lot more work as a private company to go raise money than it is to, go to Steve Ballmer and say, okay, here's my budget for the year, and have him beat you up for an hour and then move on.
And then you get your money.
But yeah, exactly. And then you get your money. The difference is that it's a little different because there's people's families and lives at stake. Versus it's not like if I have a little bit of a hiccup inside of a big organization, that my entire organization is going to get shut down. Whereas with a startup, that's always a potential outcome. And so that's where they differ, but they're remarkably similar in kind of how I have to interact. You still have customers, you still have people you have to be accountable to, but you still have people that are accountable to you. So remarkably different, remarkably similar, and also very, very different. In particular, with respect to financing. And then there's one piece that is very different, which is there is a certain sense of freedom in running your own company. Even though it's a lot more stressful, I would say, than being at a big company, you have a freedom of a lot more freedom to do really what you want. And I think that is different. It's that there's more freedom.
Where do you get your drive on a daily basis?
Well, my 6-shot latte that I start my morning with, or I once at a sales meeting. At a sales meeting, I drank 10 at a sales offsite. I drank 10 of those 20-ounce vanilla diet Pepsis. I think they're still talking about it in the sales team. It's like, for me, it's all about winning, and there's going to be something in the order of 1.4 billion handsets in the market by 2008, and some huge percentage of those are going to be smartphones, like 300 million plus, depending on whose report you read. That's a lot of places to have your software, and there's a lot to do to get there. And the opportunity to be on 1 billion of something. So I did DirectX, and that was on several hundred millions of something, and that's kind of interesting. But to be on 1.5 billion of something, that's an opportunity that how can you not get excited when you get up in the morning? And so I think it's that's where it comes from.
How do you manage the work-life balance?
Well, my spouse might tell you that I don't. It's hard. It is really hard. There's been times over the last 4 years where, I worked 7 days a week for months straight, and how I managed it was my wife would bring I have a 3-year-old son and now a 7-month-old son, and my wife would bring my older son, because my 7-month-old wasn't born yet, in, and they would just come for an hour or two over the weekend, or we'd find a night here or a night there. It's really challenging for me. What I do is I have found a structure that works well, which is I get up early. My son gets up at 6 a.m. My wife gets up at 6 a.m. because my son gets up at 6 a.m. and we spend a couple hours together in the morning, and then I can let my day go arbitrarily long, arbitrarily late, and that's helped a lot strike the balance where I get at least a couple hours every day. But it's hard. Make no mistake. Being in a small company, call it a startup, call it whatever you want. There are trade-offs you have to make.
Yeah. How would you describe your management style?
A benevolent dictator. I like collaboration. I like letting people have a lot of freedom. I like when people just can kind of do their own thing, and I strongly encourage people to do their own thing. And I have passionately held views about how certain things should be, and I kind of make sure that that's how those things should be. And other than that, though, I think the world needs more benevolent or benign dictators, really. That's, democracies are overrated. So certainly not a democracy, but I do like to give people a lot of freedom.
Yeah. Well, you were, to say the least, a management challenge. What are some of the philosophies that you've put into Action Engine to sort of keep some of the energy high, but create a culture that kind of works with people's innate tendencies?
No, and that's an interesting question. So it's, it's a challenge. A lot of people right now in my company's history, a lot of people have worked really hard for a long time. We've had some changes in management because there are people who are really well suited to early stages aren't necessarily suited to later stages. People that just got burned out under the early stages are leaving, so you're bringing in new people. So you kind of have to be very adaptive. One of the things we try to do is give people a lot of freedom, be very flexible. We try not to impinge on people's creativity too much. Try not to kind of be too dictatorial in what people need to do. Kind of my own view of how I like to work with my management team. I like to see that widespread. You give people a lot of freedom, and there's a tough balance. You give people too much freedom, and every once in a while they might abuse it, where it's to allow for all these wild personalities. Certainly, I've been blessed and not had to deal with myself in my own organization. I don't know how I deal with that.
Speaking of balance, there's sort of a fine line between confidence and arrogance. Do you care about staying on the right side of that line?
I guess I've never been clear that there was a line. I think people can confuse the two. I don't think I've ever paid attention to where that line is. I don't view myself as arrogant. I am certain many do. I'm just very confident.
You mentioned John Ludwig before. What did he mean when he suggested that you develop a weapon other than a bazooka?
Oh yes, I remember that well. That was complimentary to Silverberg's lesson. Yes, basically we were Eric and I in particular, were still using our approach of whacking people over the head to get our way. And while a trail of dead bodies is A, satisfying, and B, helps you get what you need done faster, it isn't actually very accretive to the business, because you look around, there's no one left around to want to work with you. And so he was letting us know that perhaps there are weapons, other than bazookas, nuclear bombs, to get your way. Albeit, you always want to keep a nuclear bomb in your back pocket just in case. But that, I think, is the prime learning. I now have my back pocket. It's now my weapon of last resort instead of first resort.
Right. And again, speaking about John, he kind of became a mentor to you.
Yeah.
How did your working relationship start, and how did it kind of alter throughout your career?
I think I knew John. I think I first met John actually when I was an evangelist, and I needed some materials from the Windows team for a CD project. Developers Tools project I was putting together, so it was kind of very casual interaction. And then I got to know him more and more while I was working on DirectX, again, very kind of peripheral. And then when I really got to know John was when we went to do Windows, the Internet Explorer, the multimedia to Windows in '97. And that's when our relationship altered, where I got to spend a lot more time with him. And John was a great lesson, and I think John had been very much like me when he was younger, including his excessive use of profanity. And he gave me a little book that was very funny, and it had many uses of the word F, including 4 of them in the title. So it was great. And so it was kind of, I think that was my bonding moment with John, where he said, no, secretly I'm just like you, but I'm not anymore. And he's very mellow. John's like a gentle giant, and I learned a lot from him, because he had just such a laid-back perspective on life, and yet got so much stuff done.
And you and he ended up sort of having weekly meetings.
Yeah.
What did you learn from him during those?
I think what I learned best is that this will sound like it's just repeating what I said before, but there are weapons other than bazookas, that you can take more gentle, more diplomatic approaches. And then in the end, if you still have to bomb them, but don't do it as a first resort. Yeah.
Hiring the right people is sometimes as important as doing the right thing. What are some of your favorite interview questions, and what are the types of things you're looking for?
So being the IQist that I am, what I'm really testing for is intelligence. And I don't mean that in any way that would be found as illegal in the state of Washington, because I don't believe you're allowed to do that. But what I look for is how people would approach problems. So my favorite question, though, to ask, aside from just getting a sense of people's problem-solving ability, is to ask people what their biggest screw-up is, and what their biggest success is, and what the thing they've done that they're most excited about. Because and why those are all interesting is that if people go, oh well, my biggest screw-up was the time I wore the wrong shirt, they're not very good. And you'd be surprised how many times you hear that they're not very good at self-reflection.
It's kind of like the weaknesses. Everybody advises say their weakness is that they're a workaholic.
Yeah,
they don't give you anything.
Give me a break.
Yeah.
No. What's the thing you messed up on big time that you were too embarrassed to talk about? But what's another interesting one is that if you ask somebody what they've done that they get most excited about, and if you can't get excited, tell me the thing that you most got excited about, you're not going to be able to handle being around me.
Right.
I mean, so you'd be surprised the number of people that can't get excited about something they did that was the most exciting thing in their life. I mean, that's another fascinating question.
What advice do you have for students graduating into a somewhat difficult economy?
Somewhat difficult economy. So a couple things, you know, the path is never, your path is never ever straightforward or clear cut. I mean, when I look at my career, I tried all kinds of different things. So you may find yourself needing to be inventive. Certainly, you know, to the degree that you can be in an interview forthright. For example, my questions, you will do very well with me if you honestly answer. You actually have a big screw up and tell me about it, that'll be great. If you can get excited, that'll be great. So really being yourself in an interview, I think, is really important. But I think the most important thing to know, regardless of the economy state, is that paths are nonlinear, and that whatever you think you're going to do may or may not be what you're doing, and the way to get there may not be the way you think. And that isn't really advice, that's more of kind of looking back in hindsight. But I think just kind of being yourself in an interview and not giving up, persistence is a really important quality as well.
Yeah. Where do you see yourself 5 years from now, and what do you think are some of the things that'll be in the technology space?
5 years from now, well, so what I don't ever see myself, as much as I fantasize about owning my own island with my own jet. I might own the island and own the jet, but I won't be there because I can't imagine relaxing. You know, in 5 years, I would imagine, you know, I'm fascinated by biotechnology and, you know, post-Action Engine. You know, should I not be at Action Engine in 5 years? And that's a tough one to call. Hard to say, you know, 5 years out, but I certainly am fascinated by biotechnology. I think that there's a lot of stuff going on there that could really stand to have some more precise mathematical thinking brought to bear on it, and so that could be a lot of fun. I'm fascinated about not dying, and so i.e. We have an opportunity to not die if we just put enough money and brain power behind research and got rid of some, you know, kind of obstructionist laws. So I think that could be a fascinating place to go. But I know whatever I'm doing in 5 years, it'll be around some kind of technology, and it'll be working too much. And where will we be in 5 years? Gosh, you know, every time I try to make a 5-year out prediction technologically, I'm wrong. So how about this nuclear wasteland? No, I don't want to be right about that one. You know, it's hard. In Moore's law, it never seems to give up, right? So, you know, what are we going to have? Terabyte disk drives will be standard. We'll be having cameras in the back of phones that are better than digital cameras that you can buy today, because this is 5-year-old camera technology now. I've given up on making predictions, except to say that there'll be way, way, way more stuff, and it'll be way cooler than we can imagine right now. Because every time I look back 5 years, I would have never imagined 5 years from now.
I'd like to close with a composite quote from several of the people that I spoke with about Craig. When I think about Craig, a few things come clearly to mind. He has an amazing engineering talent. In his early days, he was a coding demon, able to do in little time what most people said was impossible to accomplish at all. This now translates into unsurpassed technical vision. He is also an amazing problem solver, a logical thinker who can break down a problem into digestible chunks and then determine a solution even if it was not within his area of expertise. He brings unbounded drive, passion, and energy to everything he touches, and complete unwillingness to fail in any situation. His most annoying habit is being right. Yet thankfully, that passion also translates into a fierce loyalty towards his company, his team, his family, and his friends.